January 14th, 2026, 4:17 local time. Naval Station Norfolk, Virginia, the largest naval base on Earth. A Mark 67 SLMM, submarine-launched mobile mine, settles onto the muddy bottom of Thimble Shoal Channel. Depth, 42 feet. Water temperature, 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Current, 1.3 knots flowing northeast. The weapon is American. Deployed by Americans. In American waters. And for the next 96 hours, it will shut down the most important naval choke point in the Western Hemisphere. This isn't an attack. This is Exercise Harbor Shield. The first time in the history of the United States Navy that live bottom mines have been deployed in the approach channels to an active fleet anchorage during peacetime. The exercise was designed to answer one question. What happens if an enemy mines a U.S. home port? The answer turned out to be worse than anyone in the Pentagon expected. I'm your host at Navy Sea Power, where we break down the most critical naval operation shaping global power. Today, we're telling the story of how the U.S. Navy deliberately set itself up to fail, and why that failure may have prevented a catastrophe. Because the real story of Harbor Shield isn't about mines on the seafloor. It's about a vulnerability so severe that within 6 weeks of the exercise ending, the Secretary of the Navy submitted an emergency supplemental budget request to Congress for $4.2 billion. A budget request that was classified secret. To understand why Norfolk mined its own harbor, you have to understand what happened in the fall of 2025. Specifically, what a Virginia-class attack submarine discovered 190 nautical miles southeast of Cape Cod on October 3, 2025. USS Minnesota, SSN 783, was conducting routine anti-submarine warfare patrols along the continental shelf. Standard mission. Track Russian submarine activity along the East Coast, catalog acoustic signatures, maintain the underwater surveillance picture. The crew had been on station for 11 days. Nothing unusual. At 02:33 Zulu time, the Minnesota's towed array sonar, the TB-29A, a thin-line passive array trailing 1,200 feet behind the submarine, detected a faint contact, bearing 047, classified initially as biological, whale, possible school of fish, creating a convergent zone return. The sonar operators almost dismissed it. Almost. Petty Officer Second Class. Diana Reeves noticed something in the acoustic data that didn't fit. The contact was producing a narrowband tonal at 112 Hz. Biological sources don't produce stable narrowband tonals. Machinery does. Specifically, the reduction gear assembly of a submarine's propulsion plant. Minnesota's commanding officer, Commander Eric Dahlberg, ordered the boat to periscope depth. He transmitted a critic flash message, the highest priority communications precedence in the U.S. military, to Submarine Force Atlantic in Norfolk. Contact classified as probable Russian submarine. Estimated range, 14,000 yards. Course, southwest. Speed, 4 knots, 4 knots, creeping speed. A submarine moving at 4 knots is doing one thing, trying not to be found. The acoustic signature was eventually matched. It belonged to a Yasin M-class cruise missile submarine, Russia's most advanced nuclear attack boat. Displacement, 13,800 tons. Length, 139 meters. Armed with Caliber and Onyx cruise missiles. And critically, with the capability to deploy PMK-2 bottom influence mines through its torpedo tubes. The submarine was operating 190 miles from the U.S. coastline, well within international waters, completely legal under maritime law, and completely alarming to the intelligence community, because this wasn't the first time, it was the third. According to assessments compiled by the Office of Naval Intelligence and briefed to the Joint Chiefs in November 2025, Russian submarine activity along the U.S. East Coast had increased 340% since January 2024. 3 Yasin-M-class boats had been tracked in the western Atlantic in the preceding 18 months. 2 were detected. Intelligence analysts believed a third had operated undetected for a period of approximately 22 days in August 2025. Its presence only confirmed retroactively through signals intelligence and port departure data from Gadjievo, the Northern Fleet's primary submarine base on the Kola Peninsula. The briefing included a scenario assessment that sent a chill through the Pentagon. Russian submarines had been practicing approach patterns consistent with offensive mining operations. Not torpedo attacks, not cruise missile strikes, mining. Specifically, the covert deployment of bottom mines in the approach channels to major U.S. naval installations: Norfolk, Kings Bay, Groton, Mayport. The analysis concluded that a single Yasin-M submarine, operating covertly for 72 hours, could deploy up to 24 PMK-2 influence mines across the 3 primary shipping channels leading into Naval Station Norfolk, Thimble Shoal Channel, the entrance to Hampton Roads, and the Elizabeth River approach. 24 mines, enough to close the base. And here's the part that kept admirals awake at night. The U.S. Mine Countermeasure Force had exactly 4 operational ships to deal with such a threat. 4. For the entire Atlantic Fleet. The Avenger-class mine countermeasure ships, MCMs, were supposed to number 14. That's what Congress funded in the 1980s when the class was designed. By January 2026, only 4 remained in active service: USS Pioneer, USS Chief, USS Warrior, and USS Gladiator. Pioneer and Chief were forward deployed to Bahrain. Warrior was in dry dock at San Diego undergoing hull repairs. That left one operational mine countermeasure vessel on the entire East Coast, USS Gladiator, MCM-11. Displacement, 1,312 tons. Wooden hull, built in 1993. Top speed, 14 knots. One 33-year-old wooden ship to clear the approaches to the largest naval base in the world. Rear Admiral Catherine Voss, commander of Naval Mine and Anti-Submarine Warfare Command, NMAWC, had been warning about this gap for 2 years. Her classified readiness reports to the Chief of Naval Operations, filed quarterly since March 2024, used language that military officers rarely put in writing. Words like critical failure point and unacceptable operational risk, and, in the October 2025 report, a single phrase underlined twice: the fleet cannot guarantee access to its own ports. That October report, combined with the intelligence assessment on Russian submarine mining rehearsals, triggered a decision at the highest level of Navy leadership. Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Samuel Kirkpatrick authorized Exercise Harbor Shield on November 12, 2025. Planning was classified secret and restricted to a compartmented access list of fewer than 40 people. The exercise had one objective: prove, or disprove, that the Navy could clear a mined home port within 72 hours. 72 hours. That number wasn't arbitrary. War plans for a major conflict with Russia assumed that the fleet would need to sortie, leave port, and deploy to combat stations within 72 hours of a crisis initiation. If an adversary could mine Norfolk and keep it closed for longer than 72 hours, the entire Atlantic Fleet's warfighting timeline collapsed. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, cruisers, submarines, amphibious assault ships, all trapped at the pier. The planning for Harbor Shield took 2 months. By early January 2026, the exercise was ready. The concept was elegant and brutal. On January 14th, aircraft from Helicopter Mine, Countermeasures Squadron 15, HM-15, based at Naval Station Norfolk, would deploy Quick Strike Series bottom mines in the approach channels to the base. Simultaneously, a submarine, USS John Warner, SSN-785, a Virginia-class boat, would deploy inert Mark 67 SLMMs in deeper water approaches. The mines would be live in the sense that they contained functioning fusing systems, influence sensors capable of detecting the magnetic and acoustic signatures of passing ships. But they carried no explosive warheads. Instead, each mine contained a data recorder and a transponder for post-exercise recovery. The total minefield: 36 weapons, 12 quick-strike extended range mines deployed by air, 16 Mark 67 SLMMs deployed by submarine, 8 Mark 62 quick-strike bottom mines placed by surface craft at predetermined positions as calibration references, 36 mines across 3 channels, each channel approximately 800 meters wide and 4 to 6 nautical miles long. The mine countermeasure force assigned to clear the channels consisted of USS Gladiator, 2 MH-53E Sea Dragon mine countermeasure helicopters from HM-15, 1 unmanned surface vessel, the mine countermeasure USV prototype from the Knifefish program, and a detachment of Navy explosive ordnance disposal divers from EODMU-6. Their mission? Locate, classify, and neutralize all 36 mines within 72 hours. They began at 6 o'clock on January 14th. The first problem emerged within 90 minutes. Gladiator's AN/SQQ 32 mine hunting sonar, the primary detection system for finding bottom mines, began experiencing degraded performance in the shallow, murky waters of Thimble Shoal Channel. Water depth: 42 to 55 feet. Bottom composition: a mix of sand, silt, and clay that created acoustic clutter, making it almost impossible to distinguish a mine from a natural bottom feature. The SQQ-32 was generating contact after contact, dozens of them. Every rock, every debris pile, every discarded crab pot on the bottom was registering as a possible mine. The crew had to classify each one individually. That meant sending divers or the remote-controlled mine neutralization vehicle, the AN/SLQ-48, to physically inspect each contact. Each inspection took between 45 minutes and 2 hours, and they were finding false contacts at a rate of 11 to 1. For every mine they located, they investigated 11 objects that turned out to be nothing. Commander Kyle Briscoe, Gladiator's commanding officer, reported to Rear Admiral Voss at the Exercise Command Center. At current clearance rate, estimated time to complete Thimble Shoal Channel is 118 hours. Request additional assets. 118 hours, 5 days, for one channel. They had 3 channels to clear and 72 hours to do it. Voss didn't have additional assets to send, not immediately. The 2 MH-53E helicopters from HM-15 were operating in the wider Hampton Roads approach channel, towing the AN/AQS-24B airborne mine detection system, a sonar pod towed beneath the helicopter at low altitude over the water. The AQS-24B was performing better than Gladiator's hull-mounted sonar. It could cover a wider swath of seafloor per pass. But the MH-53E had its own problems. The Sea Dragon is the largest and heaviest helicopter in the U.S. military inventory. It was designed in the 1980s. The airframes still in service were among the oldest rotary wing aircraft in the Navy. They required an average of 44 maintenance hours for every flight hour, the worst ratio of any aircraft type in the Department of Defense. During Harbor Shield, one of the 2 Sea Dragons went down with a hydraulic system failure on the afternoon of January 14th. 12 hours into the exercise, the airborne mine countermeasure capability was cut in half. By the end of the first day, 24 hours into the exercise, the combined force had located and classified 9 of 36 mines, 25%. They were supposed to be at approximately 33% if they were on track for the 72-hour deadline. Comment minefield if you think the U.S. Navy should have seen this coming. Comment budget if you think this is a funding problem, not a capability problem. Day 2 brought a development that changed the complexion of the entire exercise. The Knifefish unmanned undersea vehicle, a torpedo-shaped autonomous mine-hunting drone, was deployed in the Elizabeth River approach channel at 5 a.m. on January 15th. This was the Navy's newest mine countermeasure technology: low-frequency synthetic aperture sonar, autonomous navigation, the ability to operate in shallow water where manned vessels faced severe acoustic clutter. Knifefish worked for 3 hours. At 8:12, the vehicle's guidance system malfunctioned. The autonomous navigation algorithm, designed to execute a precise lawnmower search pattern across the channel bottom, began producing erratic course changes. The vehicle deviated from its programmed track by 340 meters before operators on the surface detected the anomaly and issued an emergency recovery command. The recovery took 4 hours. Diagnostics revealed a software fault in the inertial navigation system, a known issue that had been flagged during developmental testing but had not been resolved before the vehicle was declared operational. The Knifefish team spent the remainder of January 15th attempting to implement a field software patch. They got it working again at 2200 hours, 17 hours lost. Meanwhile, Admiral Voss made a decision that would prove controversial. She requested activation of the Reserve Mine Countermeasure Force. Specifically, she asked Commander, Naval Surface Force Atlantic to mobilize civilian crewed military sea lift command vessels equipped with commercial side-scan sonar systems. An emergency mine countermeasure augmentation plan that had been developed on paper but never tested operationally. The plan existed because the Navy's own mine countermeasure force was too small. The idea was simple. In a real mining emergency, commandeer commercial survey vessels, install military sonar operators aboard, and use them to supplement the dedicated MCM ships. Commercial side-scan sonar was actually quite good at finding objects on the seafloor. The fishing industry, the oil and gas industry, marine archaeologists, they all used technology that could, in theory, detect a mine sitting on the bottom. The problem was integration. Commercial sonar operators knew how to find shipwrecks and pipeline routes. They didn't know how to classify mine-like contacts using military threat libraries. Military sonar operators knew the threat libraries but had never worked on commercial vessels with commercial equipment. The two groups had never trained together. Voss activated the augmentation plan anyway. 2 commercial survey vessels, contracted through Military Sea Lift Command, from a Norfolk-based ocean survey company, arrived at the exercise area at 1400 on January 15th. Each vessel carried a Klein 4000 side-scan sonar system and a 4-person crew of civilian sonar technicians. Voss embarked a 2-person military MCM liaison team on each vessel. The results were mixed. The commercial sonar was excellent at detecting bottom contacts. The Klein systems were actually generating cleaner imagery than Gladiator's SQQ-32 in the shallow, cluttered environment. But the classification process, determining whether a contact was a mine or just debris, was agonizingly slow. The civilian operators would flag a contact. The military liaison team would examine the imagery. If they couldn't classify it from sonar data alone, they had to dispatch divers or the ROV for a physical inspection. The communication protocols between the civilian vessels and the military command center were improvised on the spot. Radio frequencies had to be coordinated. Secure communications didn't exist on the commercial vessels, so all tactical data was transmitted in the clear on unencrypted channels. In a real scenario, an actual enemy mining of Norfolk, transmitting mine locations and clearance data in the clear would be an intelligence gift to the adversary. They would know exactly which mines had been found and which hadn't. They could potentially deploy additional mines in the gaps. But this was an exercise. Voss accepted the security compromise and pressed forward. By the end of day 2, 48 hours into the exercise, the combined force had located and classified 19 of 36 mines, 53%. The 72-hour deadline required 100%. The math was unforgiving. At the current rate of roughly 9 to 10 mines per day, complete clearance would take approximately 4 days, 96 hours, a full 24 hours past the deadline. That's exactly what happened. The 72-hour mark, 6 o'clock January 17th, came and went with 11 mines still unlocated. Gladiator had been operating continuously for 3 days. Her crew was exhausted. The ship's AN/SLQ-48 mine neutralization vehicle had suffered a tether failure on the morning of January 16th, requiring 4 hours of repair. The remaining MH-53E helicopter had flown 31 hours in 72 hours, an operational tempo that pushed the airframe past its recommended maintenance interval. Rear Admiral Voss did not call the exercise. She extended it. The decision was deliberate. Harbor Shield wasn't designed to demonstrate success. It was designed to quantify failure. Voss needed to know not just whether the force could clear the minefield in 72 hours. The answer was clearly no. But how long it actually took. That number was the data point the Navy needed. The last mine, a Mark 67 SLMM sitting in 51 feet of water at the southern edge of the Hampton Roads approach channel, was located and classified at 6:47 on January 18th. Total elapsed time, 96 hours and 47 minutes. 96 hours, 4 days. A full day past the operational requirement. And that was under exercise conditions. Favorable weather. No enemy interference. No threat of additional mine deployments. Perfect knowledge of how many mines were in the water. In a real scenario, every one of those advantages disappears. The adversary doesn't tell you how many mines they laid. The weather doesn't cooperate on command. And the enemy submarine that laid the mines might still be lurking in the area, ready to attack the mine countermeasure forces themselves. Voss's after-action assessment, submitted to the Chief of Naval Operations on February 4, 2026, was 214 pages long. The executive summary contained a single finding, printed in bold: the United States Navy cannot guarantee timely access to its primary East Coast Fleet anchorage in the event of a covert mining attack. The report detailed 5 critical capability gaps. First, force structure. 4 active MCM ships for the entire fleet was insufficient by an order of magnitude. The Navy's own requirement, established in 2015, called for a minimum of 11 dedicated mine countermeasure vessels. Budget pressures had prevented procurement. The Littoral Combat Ship, LCS, was supposed to fill the gap with its mine countermeasure mission package. But the LCS mine countermeasure module had been in development for over a decade and had not achieved full operational capability. Only 2 LCS ships had the module installed, and neither was deployed on the East Coast. Second, technology. The AN/SQQ-32 mine-hunting sonar, the primary sensor on the Avenger-class ships, was designed in the 1980s for Cold War-era mine threats. It performed adequately in deep, clear water with sandy bottoms. In the shallow, silty, cluttered waters typical of U.S. port approaches, its performance degraded severely. False contact rates of 11-to-1 made efficient clearance impossible. Third, unmanned systems. Knifefish was promising, but not ready. The autonomous navigation failures during Harbor Shield were symptomatic of a program that had been rushed to operational status before its software was mature. The system needed at least 18 more months of development and testing before it could be relied upon in a real contingency. Fourth, airborne mine countermeasures. The MH-53EC Dragonfleet was on life support. Average aircraft age, 34 years. Maintenance burden, 44 hours per flight hour. Mission capable rate, 49%, meaning that on any given day, fewer than half the helicopters were available to fly. The planned replacement, the MH-60S with the airborne mine neutralization system, was not yet fielded in sufficient numbers. Fifth, and most alarming, the intelligence gap. The exercise assumed perfect knowledge. The mine countermeasure force knew exactly how many mines were in the water and approximately where they'd been laid. In reality, the first indication that a port had been mined would likely be a ship hitting a mine, an explosion, casualties, and then the agonizing realization that there might be dozens more weapons sitting silently on the bottom, waiting. The Navy doesn't have a reliable way to determine how many mines an adversary has deployed. Every mine hunting operation begins with an unknown. How big is the minefield? You clear what you can find, and then you have to decide, is it safe? Or is there one more mine sitting in the mud that your sonar didn't see? During the Second World War, it took the Allies an average of 6 months to fully clear a major mined waterway. 6 months. The technology is better now, but the fundamental challenge remains the same. Mines are cheap, simple, patient weapons. They sit on the bottom and wait. Finding them is the hard part, and the harder you look, the more you realize how easy they are to miss. Here's a number that puts the problem in perspective. A single Russian PMK-2 bottom mine costs approximately $50,000 to manufacture. A single U.S. Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer costs $2.2 billion. If one $50,000 mine damages or sinks one $2.2 billion destroyer, the exchange ratio is 44,000 to 1. That's not a capability gap. That's an asymmetric warfare dream, and it's not theoretical. During the 1991 Gulf War, 2 U.S. warships, the guided missile cruiser USS Princeton and the amphibious assault ship USS Tripoli, struck Iraqi mines within hours of each other. Princeton was severely damaged. Tripoli suffered a 20 by 30-foot hole in her hull. Both ships survived, but both were knocked out of the fight. The Iraqi mines that damaged those ships were Italian-made Manta-bottom influence mines, 1970s technology. Each one cost less than $25,000. The entire U.S. mine countermeasure force that deployed to the Persian Gulf in 1991 took 4 months to clear the approaches to Kuwait's ports. 4 months. And that was with significantly more MCM assets than the Navy has today. Subscribe if you want to understand why the missions no one talks about are often the ones that matter most. The political aftermath of Harbor Shield moved fast. Rear Admiral Voss briefed the Secretary of the Navy, Carlos del Toro's successor Jonathan Whitfield, on February 11, 2026. The briefing lasted 3 hours. Sources familiar with the session described Whitfield's reaction as visibly shaken. The Secretary reportedly asked a single question at the end of the briefing. How long has this been this bad? The answer, at least a decade. Mine warfare is the least glamorous mission in the Navy. It doesn't involve aircraft carriers projecting power across oceans. It doesn't involve submarines hunting other submarines in the deep. It doesn't involve guided missiles streaking toward enemy targets at Mach 3. Mine warfare involves small, slow ships dragging sonar through murky water, looking for objects the size of a garbage can sitting on the bottom. It is unglamorous, unsexy, and critically underfunded, and it has been for 30 years. The U.S. Navy's mine countermeasure force peaked in the early 1990s with 23 dedicated mine warfare vessels. By 2000, that number had dropped to 16. By 2010, 11. By 2020, 8. By 2026, 4. Each cut was rationalized. The Cold War is over. We don't need that many. The LCS will fill the gap. Unmanned systems are the future. Budget pressures require difficult choices. All of those arguments contained elements of truth. None of them changed the fundamental reality. Mines are the most cost-effective naval weapon in existence, and the U.S. Navy had systematically dismantled its ability to deal with them. The Harbor Shield After-Action Report landed on Capitol Hill on February 19, 2026, when Admiral Kirkpatrick briefed the Senate Armed Services Committee in a closed session. The details remain classified, but within a week, the committee's ranking members, from both parties, issued a joint statement calling the mine countermeasure situation an urgent national security concern requiring immediate remediation. On March 3, 2026, Secretary Whitfield submitted an emergency supplemental budget request to Congress. The amount? $4.2 billion. The request was classified secret, but its broad outlines were reported by defense media within days. The request included funding for 6 new dedicated mine countermeasure vessels, a modified design based on the Belgian-Dutch MCM program, the largest naval mine warfare procurement since the Avenger class was built in the late 1980s. It included $1.1 billion for accelerated fielding of the Knifefish UUV program, including resolution of the navigation software issues exposed during Harbor Shield. It included $680 million for procurement of additional MH-60S helicopters configured for the mine countermeasure mission to begin replacing the exhausted MH-53E fleet. And it included $340 million for establishment of a mine countermeasure training range in the Chesapeake Bay, a permanent instrumented facility where MCM forces could practice year-round against realistic mine threats in conditions similar to those they'd face at Norfolk. Total, $4.2 billion. The cost of 2 Arleigh Burke destroyers. Congress had not yet acted on the request as of late March 2026. But the political dynamics were unusual. Mine warfare doesn't normally generate congressional attention. Carriers do. Fighter jets do. Submarines do. Mines are boring. They don't fly. They don't move. They sit on the bottom and wait. Harbor Shield changed that calculation. The exercise had proven, with quantified data, that the United States Navy could not guarantee access to its own primary base. That's the kind of finding that gets attention, not because mines are exciting, but because the consequence of ignoring them is an aircraft carrier stuck at the pier while a war starts without it. There was another dimension to the Harbor Shield aftermath that received less public attention, but may prove more consequential in the long term. During the exercise, the commercial survey vessels, the civilian augmentation force that Voss activated on Day 2, actually outperformed the dedicated military MCM assets in one critical metric, area coverage rate. The commercial Klein 4000 side-scan sonar systems surveyed seafloor at roughly twice the rate of Gladiator's SQQ-32. Their imagery was cleaner. Their operators, experienced in commercial survey work, were faster at identifying bottom contacts. What the commercial vessels couldn't do was classify contacts as mines. That required military expertise and military threat library databases. But the detection part, finding things on the bottom, the civilians were better at. This observation triggered a significant doctrinal discussion within Navy mine warfare circles. If commercial sonar is better at detection and military operators are better at classification, why not formalize the partnership? Why not pre-position commercial survey vessels at major fleet anchorages with standing contracts to provide emergency mine detection support? Why not embed military MCM liaison teams on commercial vessels as a permanent augmentation force? The concept, dubbed the Mine Warfare Augmentation Program, or MWAP, was included in Voss's after-action report as a recommended initiative. It was, in essence, an acknowledgement that the Navy couldn't build enough dedicated MCM ships fast enough to close the gap. The 6 new vessels in the supplemental budget request wouldn't be delivered for at least 4 years. In the meantime, the augmentation approach could provide a stopgap capability. MWAP wasn't without critics. Navy officers raised concerns about operational security. Transmitting mine locations on unencrypted commercial communication systems was unacceptable in a real contingency. Others questioned the reliability of civilian contractors in a wartime environment. Would commercial survey crews continue operating if an enemy submarine was known to be in the area? Would they accept the risk? The debate continued through March 2026 with no resolution. There's one more element of the Harbor Shield story that bears examination: the mines themselves. The weapons deployed during the exercise, Quick Strike and Mark 67 variants, are American mines. They represent the offensive side of the mine warfare equation, and on that side, the U.S. Navy is exceptionally capable. The Quick Strike family is a conversion kit that turns standard Mark 82, Mark 83, and Mark 84 general-purpose bombs into bottom-influence mines. The weapon sits on the seafloor and uses a combination of magnetic, seismic, and acoustic sensors to detect passing ships. When a vessel matching the programmed target signature passes overhead, the mine detonates. The Quick Strike ER variant adds a GPS-guided wing kit, allowing the mine to be dropped from an aircraft at high altitude and glide up to 40 nautical miles to its intended position. A single B-52 bomber can deploy up to 45 Quick Strike ER mines in a single pass. 45 mines from one aircraft, covering an area of hundreds of square nautical miles. The Mark 67 SLMM takes a different approach. It's a modified Mark 37 torpedo fitted with a mine warhead. A submarine launches it like a torpedo, and the weapon propels itself to a programmed location up to 10 nautical miles away, settles to the bottom, and becomes a mine. The launching submarine never enters the minefield. It can deploy weapons from a safe distance and leave the area undetected. The offensive mine capability is formidable. The irony is sharp. The same Navy that can mine an enemy's port with devastating efficiency cannot clear mines from its own port within an acceptable time frame. This asymmetry is not accidental. It's the product of decades of budget decisions that prioritized power projection, the ability to strike targets far from home, over force protection, the ability to defend the homeland. Aircraft carriers project power, destroyers project power, submarines project power. Mine countermeasure ships protect the fleet's ability to leave port. For 30 years, the Navy bet that it would never need to sweep its own harbors. Harbor Shield proved that bet wrong. The question now is whether the Navy will act on the lesson before a real adversary teaches it again. History suggests caution. After the 1991 Gulf War mining incidents, the Navy commissioned a study that recommended expanding the MCM force to 20 vessels and investing in next-generation mine detection technology. The study was shelved. After the USS Cole bombing in 2000, force protection became a temporary priority. Mines were mentioned. Nothing changed. After Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, naval analysts warned about the mine threat to NATO ports in the Baltic. The warnings were noted. The MCM force continued to shrink. Each time, the urgency faded. Other priorities consumed the budget. Other threats demanded attention. Mines went back to being boring. Harbor Shield may break that cycle, or it may not. The $4.2 billion supplemental request is sitting in Congress. The political will to fund it exists today. Whether it will exist in 6 months, when the news cycle has moved on and the next shiny weapons program demands its share of the budget, is an open question. 96 hours. That's how long it took the U.S. Navy to clear 36 mines from the approaches to its own largest base, under ideal conditions, with no enemy interference, with perfect knowledge of the threat. In a real scenario, Russian mines, no warning, active submarine threat, unknown number of weapons. The timeline could be measured in weeks. And every hour that Norfolk remains closed is an hour that aircraft carriers sit at the pier, destroyers stay in port, and the Atlantic Fleet's ability to respond to a crisis erodes. One thing is certain. Somewhere in Gadjievo, in the headquarters of Russia's Northern Fleet submarine force, intelligence officers are studying every detail of Harbor Shield they can find. They're calculating timelines, measuring response gaps, refining their own mining plans. Because if there's one lesson that mine warfare teaches, it's this. The weapon on the seafloor is patient. It doesn't need speed. It doesn't need stealth technology. It doesn't need a satellite link or an artificial intelligence algorithm. It just needs to wait. And right now, the United States Navy is not ready for what's waiting.